the moment, and I have the honor of moderating the next two keynotes. The first one is Dr. Nitin Kumar. Nitin has a PhD in computational biology and currently actually an independent consultant, among other fantastic things that he's doing. And if you look at his LinkedIn profile, actually, you will see that he has teaching and educating individuals and organization at its heart about machine learning and data science. Today he joins us from Zurich and will tell us about simply how to flip the industries on more data and AI-driven focus. Now stage is yours, Nitin. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much to all of you for joining. Oh, wow. Let's see if the claps still come, after the talk or not. So the topic of, first of all, I'm Nitin Kumar. I'm all the way from Zurich here, and teaching and reskilling is very close to my heart. And so I will be giving next 25 minutes or so, we'll be talking about reskilling and hiring initiatives in the age of AI. The presentation is more targeted towards corporates, let's say medium-sized enterprises or big enterprises. So if you're looking for a job there, or if you are working in those companies, this might come in handy. Around 3 years ago, I was talking to a lot of companies and asking them what is the return on investment of their data initiatives. And what came out is zero for most of the companies at different stages of maturity. And that got me thinking that why is this, what is going wrong in the market, that there is not much return on investment coming. So I started with the mission of making organizations AI-driven, and what we will hear in the next 20 minutes or so revolves around that. So reskilling and hiring is very important, and that's something everyone knows about, is talking about it primarily. Just to point a few reasons why. Obviously, demand and supply problem, too many juniors, too few seniors, talent churn. On average, a data scientist spends around 1.5 to 2 years in their role, and they usually move on. If you don't believe those numbers, you can actually look at the LinkedIn profiles of a couple of people. Huge knowledge gap, like exceptionally huge between businesses and AI professionals. They are in their space and they are in their space. So what is missing is basically this bridge between them, which quite often goes by the title called analytics translator these days. Then technology is just evolving too fast. Companies were struggling with digitalization, and now suddenly they have AI and data on the top. So first they have to take care of digitalization, digitize their processes and data, and then start with AI at the same time. Universities, last couple of years, a lot of universities have started specialization in data and AI, but they're good to cover base ground, but they are not applied enough. Then the last and a topic which is very close to my heart is that a lot of companies rely on external service provider to develop products. And if the people who are managing those external consultants are not good enough, what happens is nothing comes out again. And I have seen that happening again and again in a lot of companies in Switzerland. And the last but not the least, which is very important, is actually reskilling and hiring practices depend upon the maturity of an organization. It's not that something you should just hire data scientists or data engineers and so on and so on. When you hire, actually reskill plays a considerable role in gaining maturity. So what does it mean? So what we have here is that some of you might have seen it, that you can classify AI organizations into 4 maturity levels. Stage 1 is very beginner, which are primarily developing plans and building support for starting AI projects. These companies generally have a maybe very less likelihood of succeeding with AI. Then they move to the stage 2, which is an implementer stage, where they start to pilot AI use cases in simple application, and then the stage 3, which is also called as advanced stage, where AI is being used in at least key parts of the businesses. So if you're a bank, around customer journey, churn classification, other prediction models, but it has incorporated in different sections and departments of the company. And stage 4 is actually a leader organization where they're constantly learning and evolving with AI. Now, there is a journey that needed to be taken from stage 1 to stage 4. In my experience, I haven't come across any stage 4 organization in Europe yet. Most are actually in the stage 1, and I would say that around 50% are somewhere in between stage 2 and stage 3. So let's see, how do we move on from 0 stage to actually stage 1 stage, and what kind of reskilling and hiring we should do. So as I mentioned, that this is the level companies are just starting, thinking, okay, should we do it, should we not do it, go on with it or not. So the most important reskilling happens, if possible, at the level of C-level. Here what I have done for you guys' sake is that I've divided the companies into 2 groups, small and medium businesses and the medium and large businesses. So less than 300 employees and higher than 300 employees. One can also say that, okay, we can split 300 to 2,000 and then 2,000 and above, which is large enterprises. So in the small and medium-sized businesses, the C-level is generally also responsible for a business unit or a product. And if they don't know what they're getting into, they're most likely going to fail. And this is a kind of lesson I have seen happening again and again in Zurich. Quite often they work together or they outsource the entire development to a consulting company. And what happens is a consulting company comes on board, talks, magic, buzzwords, and all the rest of it. And what they find out, nothing comes out of it. So there, if the C-level knows how to ask the right questions, they can actually manage those consultants well. Medium and large businesses, most often at this stage of maturity, the development happens in a business unit, whereas one business owner or a manager has actually gone and reskilled himself or herself, and then they start a project from their budget. At this level, it's very early stage. C-level may or may not be involved, maybe in medium-sized enterprises, yes, but in higher enterprises, not. If they do hire at this stage, at least the medium to large enterprises, they tend to hire generalists, mostly data scientists, not the data engineers, but mostly data scientists and software engineers. Quite often, in all these organizations, outsourcing model is the most standard one. Now, with this practice, we are moving a bit towards the implementer organization, where now, what we want to do is we want to start piloting some AI use cases. How do we do that? So around 2 years ago, actually, MIT released a huge results of a huge survey about several thousand companies and several hundreds of thousand employees. What they did, they asked companies how are they progressing in their AI journey and what return on investment are they getting. So what you have on the x-axis is actually the steps those organizations take to move from stage 1 maturity to stage 4 maturity. And what we have on the y-axis is actually the likelihood of generating value from AI. It's a likelihood. Most of us are data professionals here, so we know that it can never be 100%. But with these steps, you can actually move to 75%. Now, what we would do is that we have at the very base stage 1, at the very end, which we have covered. Now we want to move to stage 2. Stage 2 is, talent, infrastructure, and strategy. And you can see that, nothing against you or people who are in the data science field, infrastructure and talent has almost very small impact, 5% impact of generating value from data and AI. But the strategy itself contributes heavy. 14%. So if your C-level now, you can imagine, knows what they are doing, you have the most gain. So I would like to quickly mention a few lines about strategy here. This is a picture about how the money is distributed or should be distributed in an organization. If $1 is spent on developing an algorithm, which includes the salary of a data scientist, per se, and the manager time in that amount, and also the software costs and so on, $10 are spent on work process integration. And 100 more are needed to bring a cultural and change in the company. Now, keep that in the back of your mind when you're working on a data science project, that it's not about what you do, it's about how things change around what you do. And to be able to do that, now from stage 1 to stage 2, what we need is, now we need really reskilling of the C-level. They cannot be replaced, not at least easily in most companies, but you need is also the strategy reskilling of those people, that hey, this is how you go on and decide a 2-year or a 5-year strategy with 6 months milestones in place. If they do have to hire, quite often they do, they generally tend to hire data engineers and data scientists. Because now we have the infrastructure and talent is also a part of it. Ideally, for every data scientist, you have 2 to 5 data engineers. Outsource, they keep on doing. Medium to large enterprises, there is the same system, C-level, data strategy. What is very important here is that the IT needs to be reskilled in data engineering and MLOps, because they are the guys who are going to be controlling the infrastructure at the end. If they hire generally data strategists, which are very few in the market, then rest of the specific roles, in engineering, data engineer, data scientist, and so on. With this, we actually move on to now we are ready to move on to the stage 3, which is the advanced stage, and we have to pilot or we have to use AI in our key parts of business. What does it mean? So now we are somewhere here, this keep an eye on the red emoji, that we are in the stage 2 and we are moving to stage 3. So what is there in between? We have aligned production and consumption and beyond automation. Who has put a use case in production here? 4, 5, very good. How many people, is your use case being used by the people it was developed for? 1, okay, 2, maybe 3, huh? So out of all of us, let's say 5%, 10% of the people have gone that far. That's what happens at this stage, aligning production and consumption and moving beyond automation. So constantly POCs are being produced. So companies are stuck in a POC trap and they cannot move forward. So at this stage, the goal is to actually develop pipelines. Pipelines allow how use cases would be going into production when needed. And production doesn't mean technology part, because we have seen that contributes very less. It's around putting the use case to use and create value out of it. What is also needed on the consumption side is actually the use cases are now in use. Managers know what they are doing. They understand the ethical aspect of the use case they are working with. End user knows, what they are using and why they should use it and why it's better than not using it. So as you can imagine with the keywords, quite some now side roles are popping up here. What is also needed here is moving beyond automation. So beyond automation means that we have to think of the ways humans can interact with an AI system. I can share the slides later, but there are different modes a human can interact with AI. For example, AI decides and implements itself, where you have the example of pricing inventory in a supermarket chain. The whole system can be automated end to end. You don't need a human to validate, what is the right value of a product or not. To all the way to human generates and AI evaluates, which is the example of digital twins, where actually human is coming up with the scenarios and AI is testing if those scenarios can work and not. And successful organizations, at least 32% of them, say that they have all the 5 modes of interactions working in their company. So again, we have to move out of the classical prediction problem, but how that prediction problem is actually used, that becomes important. So now what do we have to do and reskill and hire? You can see that here already. End user reskilling becomes exceptionally important here. Because if they don't know what they're getting into, no one will use it. Another simple example here is, let's say you produce a churn prediction model. You create, for every customer some probability of churn. You give them your SHAP explainability values, but they don't understand what they're doing. So they're not going to trust it. So you have to teach them what SHAP means in simpler terms and tell them what it means, when they look at the plot. What is also very important at this stage is the stage of role of analytics translators. Why? Because what happens in most companies is they start with the most obvious use cases first, and then they run out of ideas, because that's like a standard approach. To constantly come up with ideas, constantly coming up with new use cases, you need these translators' roles. It's very good if you develop them internally, so people who are business savvy teach them tech, or people who are tech savvy teach them business. So that they can, basically the goal is to generate an AI-powered organization. So constant supply of use cases is needed all the time. Obviously not all will make into production, but those who do will generate a lot of value. At this stage, at least small and medium businesses generally tend not to hire because they have already hired in the previous stage. What they focus on is streamlining their processes. Outsourcing keeps happening. Medium and large organization, things tend to change here at this stage. One company I was involved in, I was teaching them MLOps last year, one of the biggest transportation companies in Switzerland. They are now in between the stage 2 and stage 3, and they have like 35 POCs and only one POC in production, one use case in production. That too is not generating value, it's more for customer list reviews and and so on. So 34 use cases are stuck, and then I was invited to give a talk on a similar topic there. So end users is what they're skilling now. Translator roles is what they're training now. And what they're doing in terms of hiring, they have finally hired data-savvy product owners and managers. At this stage, you have to have them. If you don't have them, the product will just lie on a shelf, or it might not even reach the shelf, actually. It might just lie on the ground. So hiring this kind of role becomes very, very important at this stage. Quite often, these people don't exist. What I've seen happening is that the classical people who did product ownership in software engineering now moving to data science, thinking that it's all tech, but it's not all the same tech. It's a new form of tech. So here, product owners or managers can also be trained within an organization, or they can be grown there. In big organization, mid-management becomes the bottleneck here. So you need to carry them with you, not leave them. But that requires them, again, to reskill, workshops, awareness of the mid-management. And if you don't do that, most likely what will happen is that things will die out in silos. So one has to think of creative ways, like we heard it in the talk before from Christian, that we have to be able to come up with new approaches to teach that information to people and bring that forward in their hands, actually, to use it. Outsource keeps happening here again, from all the level. That moves us, makes us go to from stage 3, now we are gonna go to stage 4, which is a leader organization that has resolved all those issues which we have talked about, from stage 1 to stage 3, has gathered those learnings and knows how to move forward. That's where the last part comes into picture with the highest impact. 22% comes from knowledge management and 12% comes from roles. Now, if you look at the 34% together, it's not twice, but it's, let's say, more than 1.5 times of the first step we had between stage 1 and stage 2. So the most gain happens here. So if you have taken care of the stage 1 to 3 pipeline very well, here you just boom, And what does it mean now, knowledge and roles? How many companies have roles around data stewards defined here? Some of you? Okay, one. Data owner roles. Role of an end user in an AI application? None. Data security roles? Perhaps. Yeah, so that's what it means here, knowledge and roles. This was a survey from 2020, but the results are pretty much the same from a consulting company I've been following for a while, that this survey conducted from Europe, this is from European countries, that 50% of the organization approximately say that they manage data as a business asset. So they are collecting it. Some say that they're driving, or 2/3 say that they're driving innovation with data, whatever that means in their mind. 73% still say, or 2/3 still say, that there is no data culture in the company. So you can develop something, but again, it's not put to use. People don't care. It's a new buzzword. This is all the PhDs. They are in their own world. So that's the feedback that's coming out. There is no way to create a data-driven organization. 62% say that they don't have that. So knowledge becomes important, and culture becomes important. What also becomes important is the concept of governance here, which sits generally between strategy and operations. What do these guys do? They create those policies. Who has access to data? Who is allowed to use it? What are the security concerns? What kind of reskilling or hiring initiatives I need to take right now so that I can move forward with what I have had at that stage 3. So I have a lot of POCs, now I want to go forward, so maybe I have to reskill my end user, and so on. So this becomes the most common cause why companies struggle with generating value from data. Keeping that in mind, So that's where the last kind of reskilling happens. At this level, organizations have to have a CDO, Chief Data Officer, Chief Analytics Officer, Chief Decision Officer. There are several roles, terms that goes around by name. They have to have data governance in place. Data governance is not about technology. I have to say it very clearly, because people think that we have bought a data governance framework or a software where you can find all the data. That's not how it works. It revolves around reskilling IT and business professionals, defining their roles, giving them responsibilities. And this is primarily a problem of training and culture, not technology. If someone comes to you and says, hey, I have a data governance tool, you want to ask more people questions rather than technological questions there. Data literacy is the key to succeed at this level, because if your entire organization is not joining hands to move forward, you're doomed to fail. So everyone in the organization should know basic concepts around visualization, data storage, drawing business data models, because these are the guys who are either supplying the data or consuming the data. And if they don't know where to find it, what to do with it, things just get stuck. CDOs are quite often hired as well, but very few exist. So I propose to at least my clients that the best practice is that they take one of their core leaders and put that person together with an external service provider who can be, let's say, a mentor or a guide in their journey. And then this CDO actually is basically taking care of the internal responsibilities, but being guided by an external service provider. In medium and large businesses, generally CDOs are present. Data governance is also, reskilling is needed there as well. Data literacy initiatives is something everyone is talking about. Quite often in large enterprises, what they do have is that they also hire chief learning officer. And the role of this person is to identify, let's say, do what they did in the last 20 minutes or so. And if needed, or both of them anyway, outsource their development. This actually brings us, with respect to the hiring and reskilling part, from stage 1 to stage 4. So what we have done now in the last 20 minutes or so, we have actually looked at what happens at every stage of maturity and development, and what can one do. Now, if you guys want, you can use this actually as a way to move forward or take things forward in your organization. One question that might be hitting your mind is that, what do other organizations do? Do they hire? Do they reskill? Do they have budgets for that or not? So this was from a same study that what you see on your left-hand side is actually the development on job training, and on the very right-hand side is the outsourcing model. So majority of the leaders or stage 4 organizations tend to train either on the job or via formal training. World Economic Forum has said that the average time an employee spends on learning has gone up from 1 week to actually 3 weeks in last 10 years. So that's the time as a data scientist or as a job seeker, you should ask your employer to give you every year. If they don't agree to that, you might not want to work for them. And that's the time that an employer should be able to give to their business, to their teams as well. Similarly, on the very right-hand side is outsourcing, which is very common in early stage companies, but as they move from stage 1 to stage 4, they also change from outsourcing actually to hiring and reskilling internally. With this, I'm actually at the end of the presentation. So to summarize everything, that hiring and reskilling practices really vary according to where you stand in your maturity. If your C-level is not educated enough, it's not on board, you might actually not want to start with AI because you're going to fail. I've seen that happening again and again. And strategy actually has one of the highest impact on generating, one of, I think, second highest in the chart we saw. The first highest impact comes from actually governance, defining knowledge and roles. That requires, again, when we talk about productionization, it's not only putting use case into production, but all the way to supplying end user generated data back into the production system for retraining and redevelopment. And last but not the least, most AI organizations or leader organizations hire and train, whereas the stage one organization outsource the development. This, I have to show some acknowledgements quickly. So obviously Chris and Dania, Data Lift and AI Guild for having me here and giving this talk. Data Innovation Alliance is something similar to Guild in Switzerland. They have helped me reach out to a lot of clients and bring that awareness outside. My clients, quite a few of them in Switzerland. Everlearn and Syntheticus are two startups I am supporting. Everlearn is in the lifelong learning space, and the Syntheticus is around data privacy that most companies don't have. They cannot use either customer data or data is not available, so Syntheticus helps create synthetic data that looks as good as real data. With this, time to close it. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Nitin. This was a very nice talk. Any questions from the audience?
Hi, I really appreciate the talk, and especially when you emphasize the importance of data strategy. But where I don't agree is actually where data literacy comes into play, because I would see it actually as the stage 0. So, yeah.
Good question, but what happens most...
There is no question, actually. This was a comment, but
yes,
I
good
would
comment.
love to hear your comments, yeah.
Yeah, so good comment, but what happens is that most companies do not want to immediately train all the employees in the very early stages of their development. So that's why even if you bring data literacy at that level, it generally tends not to succeed when you don't even know where you are moving. So it has a bigger role to play when you are towards the end of your maturity, because now you know in selected, tested groups that the things work and the system works. Now we want to move, across our organization. But if you start from the beginning, it gets shady. Very good point. So one very common reason why companies don't move ahead with the artificial intelligence is actually fear. Fear that the AI is going to replace people. So what happens is that, what at least I have seen in Switzerland in a lot of companies, is that when they do this reskilling, most of the employees are not even on board to do the reskilling. They come, they leave. So till they have seen something, touched something, felt something that, okay, this has helped my colleague, so it can help me as well. The learning itself has almost no impact on the journey. That's why I say that it's towards the end.
Hello, I'm Shaul Hamid. Thanks for your presentation. I actually wanted to know, so I'm the CTO of a tech startup in Berlin, and based on your AI maturity, we are in the stage 1 and we are heading to the stage 2. So what I wanted to know is, do you have any recommended courses or materials which I can recommend to my C-level teams for reskilling on these topics?
So I do reskilling for all these topics. Beyond that, I think there are some nice books on data strategy that I can recommend you later. And online, there is not much. And I'm not a big fan of sending people to universities for these topics because, it's not a research topic, it's more application topic. But I can give you some books later, give some ideas.
Thank you for the nice talk. I have a short question. You showed that the cost for reskilling is quite high relatively to the algorithm part, for example. How do you convince companies that they should invest in this when it's very far removed from the value generation? It's very hard to define a return on investment for some things like this. Thank you.
So you mean the part with the training culture and the change management? So that covers all the aspects. It's not only reskilling, but it's also change management, defining new roles, assigning new responsibilities, and so on. Yes, reskilling costs generally tend to be high depending upon where people are learning. But what you can do is that you could quantify the effect of reskilling. So the way I do it with my clients is that I usually ask them the questions around what do they want to gain out of this training. May it be in MLOps, may it be in data strategy, and at the end of the training, then they know if they have gotten that out or not. Along with that, what I do with them is that I actually follow for 3 months, that every month there is a meeting with the people who have attended the training, and then there is a back and forth communication asking them, how is the training helping you? So at the end of 3 months, what they walk away with is actually they get to know, hey, this is what training we did, and this is what came out of it. So you have to really follow up with the people who are part of the training and really make sure that they are using that work. Otherwise, nothing is going to happen. And one example, quick one I can do is that I was involved in developing for a big insurance company in Switzerland this analytics translator training, which scales to 5 trainings per year. And there we see that every 3 months, they have around 5 to 7 new AI use cases in insurance. So in a year, they have around 20 to 30 new use cases that are beyond, the classical insurance use cases that they have in the backlog. And this is their quantification of that training.
Any more questions? Oh,
yeah. Thanks again. My question goes into a similar direction. Let's imagine I'm in a big company. We already are very open to new technologies. There is capital, there is money, everybody's open-minded. But now I face the problem to measure the ROI of non-existing projects. So I have to outline the projects, I have to measure a ROI somehow to convince my boss to invest in very expensive product owner, project managers, developers.
Yes.
How do you quantify the ROI in some AI projects? Do you have examples?
Sure. So I don't have them here, but most AI use cases fall into specific categories. Now, if you're making some processes more efficient, or are you creating a new product or new service sector? If you can say that, okay, my use case falls in this category, one is proportional to the number of hours you're going to save for how many employees, another one is just the potential of money you're going to make. This you can estimate easily, Now the part comes around costs. I think that's where the trickiness happens. Let's say if your project has a potential of generating 5 million over the next 5 years, so $1 million every year as an example, then you can easily spend around 30 to 50,000 francs or dollars or euros in a POC, because that's the risk you are putting in, It's nothing with respect to 5 millions. But if you say that your use case is going to generate 100,000 in 5 years and you're asking for 50,000 bucks to just start the use case or to go to the POC, that's a wrong approach. So, and data science itself has an inherent R&D component, And R&D is the POC stage. Then comes the production much later. So you can use that information to get actually a better estimates of how much money you need now and how much you will need in 6 months or in a year and so on. And there are some very nice theoretical papers around that as well.
we have time for one more small question.
So I've been trying to get my head around some of the things that you were presenting, and I wanted to draw you out on this hypothesis, particularly of the 1 to 10 to 100. Mm-hmm. So I get, you have these 4 stages. So you could imagine that most companies are on this, and actually most companies probably would like to do this.
Yes.
Then you mentioned the POC cycle of hell, actually, that you can get stuck in. And you also said, of course, that at the end of the day, many of the big wins are actually later, so you have to keep going.
Yes.
But you also actually said, this 1 to 10 to 100. So is this a hypothesis actually why companies at some point get stuck and don't move forward? Is it simply that it gets expensive, and perhaps for some just simply too expensive? Is data-driven actually expensive to do in the first place? Or is there something else also going on that actually means they get... So my hypothesis would be that a lot of companies get stuck somewhere 2 and 3 or between 2 and 3, and they never get to 4, even though they try. And what's going on?
So I think the most important thing to relate to this 110 and 100 is how you split that 110 and 100 at what stage. Let's say in the very early stage of from stage 0 to stage 1, most of it goes into hiring, let's say as an example, There, the 10 is, one is completely used, algorithm development, or all the 100 goes into algorithm development. But if you move between stage 2 and stage 3, there you have the POCs, that are already there. You have to focus, if possible, a lot on integration of those use cases. So now more of that money will go into data engineering resources rather than POC resources. When you move from stage 3 to stage 4, it goes into the usability of the use cases. So there, the more money goes into cultural change and reskilling. So it's still the money, total amount of money is the same. The distribution changes at which stage of development you are at. And overall, if you look at all the 4 stages together, the split is 110 and 100. So one has to be able to permute it, come up with those numbers according to the stage you are at.
Very nice. Let's get one more round of applause for Nitin.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Now we have a short 15-minute networking break, and let's gather back at 4 o'clock here.